I'm Suzanne and I nerd out over art supplies. A few weeks ago, I decided to put together a new, slightly larger travel kit for longer trips. I have somehow accumulated a lot of travel pouches of all sizes, but after a lot of waffling, I settled on this mid sized generic thing from Amazon. I'll link it, but check out the similar alternatives because prices really bounce around. At any rate, it's nice and deep. It has a zippered mesh pocket and comes with two of these panels of pen loops, though I cut out the second one. In full disclosure, I've already taken this on two trips. I planned to do some plein air painting, but holy moly, I am not built for heat, and this summer has been crazy hot, like kind of everywhere. Anyway, I think I have everything I need in here, but honestly, the best way to make sure is to test it out in the air conditioned comfort of my studio. So here's what I packed. If anything catches your eye, I'll put links in the description. But for the record, this video is not sponsored, and all of this is stuff I bought with my own money and have used for years. Starting with pencils. This is a mechanical Graph Gear 500 with 0.5 millimeter B4, that's pretty soft, lead that I bought separately. It's lovely and dark and precise, but it does break really easily, so I also have a cheap Bic 0.7 millimeter taken from my kids' old school supplies. This purple guy is really my go to when sketching compositions before painting. It has a standard number 2 or HB lead, and it comes in a pack of 40 for less than the cost of one Graph Gear pencil. Then I also have a precision stick eraser, the Tombow Mono Zero, in a 2.5 millimeter round tip. Truth be told, I hardly ever use this because I mostly only use pencils for guidelines and sort of erase them en masse if I'm going to erase them at all. But when I do need it, it's clutch. Next, I have a selection of black Pigma pens, a fine brush tip, a bold 1 millimeter felt tip, and a couple of fine liners in 02 and 005. I love these because the ink dries matte and waterproof, it doesn't bleed, and it matches across the range. Next are my favorite gel pens. The Uniball Signo 1 millimeter in white, silver, and gold. The white is super reliable for highlights and corrections, and the metallics are really just fun for messing around. On the other side, I have a couple of small watercolor brushes, a Princeton Velvet Touch 3/8 inch angle shader and a Princeton Aqua Elite 1/4 inch angle shader. For loose painting, straight lines, and swatching, I almost always prefer angle shaders to round or flat. If I could get these in a travel brush format, I would. This other one is a Princeton Velvet Touch Grainer. I'm really not sure this needs to be in here. It's theoretically good for things like grasses, fur, and wood grain, but in practice, it holds so little water, it's actually pretty tricky to use. I could do a whole video just on specialty brushes like this. Then, of course, I have a sprayer. It's empty right now for travel. And then I've got some more specialty pens. This is another Pigma brush pen, but in silver. Really, it's just light gray, but incredibly versatile for subtle shading and texture. I've also got Unipin fine liners in dark gray and sepia, which are great for when I need fine details, but when black would like break the illusion of distance or just pop out too much. Next are two Pitt artist pens from Faber-Castell. These have fine brush nibs, and I find they're great for adding last minute detail. I'll swatch these real quick. Oh, stand by. A little bit. This is not you time. Shoo. Okay, where were we? So this is the Pigma brush in silver, Unipin in dark gray. All of these are supposed to be waterproof. We'll give them just a second to dry. I also have two Pit Pastel pencils in cream and a cool yellow. These are also really versatile for highlights, foreground details, and texture. Because you can blur them out, they're also great for like glow effects or to soften the focus on distant objects. Oh, it's going to be one of those days. A little bit. A little bit. You're embarrassing me in front of my friends. Okay, let's put these waterproof claims to the test. This brush is quite wet. The Pigma and Unipin ink isn't moving at all. The Pitt Artist pens are coming up a bit. This is actually news to me because I've only ever added them after painting. It's not any sort of deal breaker for me, but good to know. They're supposed to be light fast as well, but I'm not going to test that right now. Moving on. In the main part of the pouch, I have paper. This is a Strathmore 500 series watercolor journal. I haven't used this in a while. Here's a sketch I did of the Cotswolds a few years ago. The idea was to use just these three colors: Daniel Smith Sap Green, Sennelier Royal Blue, and Daniel Smith Buff Titanium. That said, I definitely used plenty of Daniel Smith Moon Glow as well for the road, roof, and shadows. For urban sketching, Buff Titanium and Moon Glow are hands down my most used convenience colors. Anyway, I love this paper. Cold press, 100% cotton, and a really beautiful texture. Perfect for slipping into a travel kit as long as you have a separate hard surface. Sadly, these journals are discontinued, but they're really easy to replicate yourself with your own favorite paper. Speaking of which, I also have this little block of extra white Fabriano Artistico cold press. This is my default go-to 100% cotton paper because the color stays vibrant, it's easy to control your paint, and it is so forgiving when you want to make changes. I've also got a small stack of paper towels. Because I generally have limited water with me, wiping my brushes before rinsing is really important. Of course, they're also clutch for water control, blotting, and in case of spills. My favorite type are actually the fancy napkins they have at fancy hotels, but this is my second fave, Kleenex brand hand towels. I like that they're pre-folded, thick, smooth, extremely absorbent, and that one is usually the perfect size for a painting session. Down here are a few more things. A tiny little water cup. Oh, it has actual water in it. Oh, that could have been quite disastrous. Okay, so pro tip, don't keep water in your water cup and then forget it's there. Of course, I also have palettes here, but we'll look at those in a minute. Here's a collection of metal clips and magnets that work with each other and also for holding things to my magnetic whiteboard here. As an aside, if you haven't seen my 12 knot art supplies video where I show how I use that, I highly recommend it, and it's only 12 minutes long. So then I also have some drawing tools here, a circle template, a tiny ruler, and a 30-60-90 triangle that I also use as a straight edge, ruler, and T-square. Now, this is a collection of Caran d'Ache Neocolor 2s. This is a little tricky for me. I love these for so many things, but not everything. And it's really hard to predict when I'm going to want them and in what colors, but I can't drag my whole collection around. So I just sort of guessed here and chose some favorite landscape tones. I'm really ambivalent about it though, and considering these can theoretically melt, and I'm often traveling in extreme heat, it might be better to leave these at home. I'm not sure. Incidentally, this tin came from a 50th anniversary edition set, and several of the colors I chose here are special edition. Caput Mortem, Ocupa Green, and Zinc Ochre were instant favorites for me. When I put this set together, I was feeling bad about featuring yet more products you couldn't buy anymore. But surprise! Caran d'Ache is now selling sets comprised exclusively of special edition colors from the 50th anniversary run, including a set that includes all 15 of those special edition colors. Now, plenty of artists have justifiably big feelings about this, but personally, I was happy with the 50th anniversary sets I purchased, and I'm happy to be able to get more of my special edition colors so I don't have to be so precious about the ones I'm already using. Now, let's look at the watercolors. This little tin is nothing special, but it is bizarrely hard to find. I got it in a set of two on Etsy years ago. I just like that it's small and slim, it's metal so I can use it with magnets, and it has an open mixing space. And for such a tiny tin, it holds 23 standard half pans that I can refill or swap out at will. I like that. I've been using it for years, but this is a freshly curated set of colors, which I'll swatch in a minute. Incidentally, you can see the pans are not filled very deeply. This is intentional. First, I don't want to waste paint before I've tested out this set of colors together. Second, the extra space in the pans allows me to add a lot of water and activate a lot of concentrated color. Third, it's easier to control the amount of paint on the brush without contaminating adjacent colors. I know a lot of artists are not bothered and happily dab their brush directly from one color to the next, but I am not that well adjusted. Anywho, you can't really tell here, but there are actually no greens in this palette. I should be able to mix any green I need from these colors. But lest you think I'm being some sort of purist, the reason I didn't include any convenience greens here is that I love them too much and could not possibly narrow them down to a few. So instead, I put 24 of them in this other palette. This, by the way, looks exactly like one of those old plastic Cotman palettes we all started with, but it's a cheap copy and I actually hate it. I'm going to transfer them to a metal tin as soon as I get the chance. Finally, let's look at the odds and ends in the front pocket. Starting with the travel brushes. I included some from two different sets. First are these Etcher travel brushes I got from a mystery pack. I've chosen a round 4, a round 0, and a round 8. These are very small for their numbers and they don't hold a lot of water, but they're still good for detail or miniature paintings. The other thing, something I didn't fully appreciate when I first got them, is that they're extremely lightweight. I have a few sets of inexpensive travel brushes from Amazon that I swear weigh like 5 times what these do. And also, these are particularly easy to get into their caps without damaging bristles. The other line I have here is the Princeton Aqua Elite in rounds 10, 8, and 6. These are synthetic sable and much juicier than the Etcher brushes, but they still hold a point and they aren't floppy or hard to control like a squirrel hair brush. Obviously, none of these are huge brushes, but on the road, the biggest paper I'm working on is roughly A5 or 5 by 8 inches anyway, so I really don't need larger brushes. Next is a pile of cotton buds, although I seem to have only included the pointy cosmetic kind here. I'll have to add some regular round-tipped ones. And these are magnetic pen holders I use to keep brushes from rolling away. Next is a tiny little compass. I keep a much better one in my studio, but this will do in a pinch. Next is some tape. These are Nito, sold as Holbein soft tape. I've talked about it in other videos. There is also a 2-hole pencil sharpener, and then this, a sharpener for Neocolor 2s. Not that I need my Neocolor 2s sharp. I like to use the shavings for different textures and effects. I could probably just use this, a little retractable craft knife, which, by the way, has gone through airport security many times with no problem. Then there are a couple of erasers, one kneadable and one dust-free plastic. This tube of Holbein white gouache is great for highlights or mixing it with watercolors to get bright opaque tones when I need an extra pop. And finally, I have a 5 milliliter oral syringe, mostly just for filling my spritzer. You might notice I don't have any water brushes in here. I do own some, but I've just never enjoyed using them. Something else I am taking that isn't shown here is a 16-ounce leak proof water bottle. That just stays permanently in my suitcase at this point. Okay, time to make swatch charts. Generally, my approach in this palette was to include reliable mixing colors, urban sketching convenience colors, and a few hues that just bring me joy. Sorry I lost the first bit of footage. I'll just call out a few colors here. Naples yellow is a semi opaque, almost peachy yellow that is very handy for architecture both where I live and many places where I visit. This Sennelier royal blue in the corner is my default sky color. This dioxazine purple reminds me that I actually included all 6 colors from the core intensity set, which is an extremely underrated palette of very bright colors that make amazing, gorgeous, clean mixes. This Caput Mortem is a new one in my collection, much more opaque than I'm used to, and frankly, right now I'm dubious, but it's worth trying out. Of course, not everything has to have a specific use in mind. I included a bunch of pinks and purples purely because I love them. Finally, I just want to show how workable this royal blue is on this Fabriano cotton paper. You can play with your clouds all day. Since I have some space left on this page, here are the Neocolor 2s. If you haven't used them, they're water soluble, so they can be used like soft crayons or watercolors, or, as I prefer, a mix of both. Swatching is important though, because the hue often looks very different after you add water, and they have varying opacity. I like to swatch it 3 ways. Dry, of course, though I'd usually put down a heavier layer than this. Then activated with just enough water to see the mass tone, and then washed out until the solids are fully dissolved. I may as well tell you, this is extremely enjoyable. I also love to use them dry into wet. I'll kind of speed through the greens here because they're just all my favorites. Most of these brands are fairly easy to find except Zecchi Toscana. Those are handmade, honey based watercolors I bought from the Zecchi store in Florence, Italy. This store is worth a visit to Florence all by itself. It's one of those ancient and tiny places full of huge glass jars of pigments that serves Florence's art students and professional painting restorers. You know, the people who work on Renaissance masterpieces. I bought their set of 48 half pan watercolors, and it was the most I've ever spent on a single art supply. And I've never regretted it for a moment. Aside from that, there are a few duplicate colors that I threw in last minute just to fill out this palette. I should at least replace one of these blacks with Payne's Gray or a neutral gray tint. And yes, I own more greens than this, and I'm sure I'm not done buying new ones. All right, I have everything set up to paint. Note to self, I need to throw in a fresh roll of tape. I taped my paper to the desk this time so editing Suzanne doesn't have to chase it around the frame later. And note to you, I used my metal clips to hold up my printed reference photo. Here's that image chosen at random from the running collection I maintain. Care to guess where I took it? I start by painting in the water. and then using that color as a base for the sky. I'm painting the sky wet and wet on everything above the horizon line, which I'll explain in a sec. But first, while the paint is still wet, I lift some out with a Q-tip to suggest hazy clouds. While that dries, I start the foreground with a base layer of buff titanium. So, why did I paint the sky right over the mountains? Something I really like about this image is the extreme depth of field. We've got flowers and foliage within feet of the viewer and mountains miles away. A high resolution photo can provide lots of clues about distance that a small painting sketch just can't. So, if I attempted to try to copy the photo's level of detail, and believe me, I've tried in the past, it just ends up flattening the scene or making for a busy, unfocused mess. My job as a painter is to create an experience, and in this case, I want to convey that sense of distance. The first method I use is atmospheric perspective, where distant objects fade into the color of the sky. I just reverse engineer this by starting with the sky color and lightly glazing the mountain colors over them. Now I just have to resist the temptation to add too many details to this distant background. Back to the foreground, I'm filling in the shadow with moonglow. While I work on the balustrade, can I get your opinion on something? I'm still figuring out how to best edit process videos. Do you have a time lapse speed preference? Do you prefer real time, a little sped up, or hyperspeed? And aside from speed, do you prefer to see the full process or just the highlights? And what about audio? Do you prefer full play by play narration or just casual chat, or is music better? Thank you in advance. Okay, starting in the grass, light and shade. I'm adding the flowers directly over white to keep them bright and belatedly remember to make the closer ones bigger. These orange flowers, irises, will have to go on in a few different layers. So while all that dries, I fill in this extreme foreground foliage in greenish black. I try to maintain a sense of form and dimension with these flower mounds, which are partially in the shade, by not being afraid of very deep tones. The bigger leaves are my least favorite part here. I can't really suggest the forms. I actually have to paint the damn things. And have I mentioned I'm not that patient? Ugh. Okay, back to fun, adding a little darker orange to the irises. This is Core Transparent Pural Orange, and as you may know, Core has famously high flow. So if I dotted this in before the base layer had dried some, the core would have totally taken over those flowers. This is a great attribute in a lot of cases, but also reason number 1 million that you really need to get to know your paints. Next, I'm adding a tiny bit of buff titanium to the lamps and lightly blotting it to simulate old glass. Now, some warm brown for the flower stems. And I need to add texture to the walk. This is a historic estate with charming gravel paths, and I want to make sure I convey that this is not just some modern concrete slab. I'm building it up with a mix of paint, pens, and pastel pencil. Now I use my Unipin dark gray fine liner to do the lamps. Can you see how if I'd used black ink, it would have visually brought them forward and broken that sense of depth? Now, at this point, I'm pretty tired and all I can see is my mistakes. So I decide to take a break and come back with fresh eyes and take another pass, again, specifically at adding depth. I apologize for not filming that, but if you want to pause, you can play Spot the Difference. Starting from the top, I softened the hard line on the mountain here. I added some background plants to break up the horizontal line of orange flowers and hide where the wall is missing. I added another more detailed foreground iris and doled out a few of them in the back. I reduced the size of the most distant pink flowers and cleaned up the closer ones. I softened some of the detail in the balustrade and added bigger, more defined detail in the foreground gravel and grass. What do you think? Did that help sell the depth? Or was I just overworking? So, did my new travel kit pass the test? I clearly had enough paint and almost all the bits and bobs I needed. I realized I needed a fresh roll of tape, some regular Q tips, and a better metal palette for my greens. As for the Neocolor 2s, I didn't use them because I like to use them chunky, and that probably would have been counterproductive to my goal of creating depth, except maybe on the flowers. If I'd had some good pinks or oranges, I probably would have used them. I said I couldn't have my whole collection of Neocolor 2s in my travel kit, but I belatedly realized I could have 20 or 30 colors if I cut them down to an inch or two. And if they melt or something, at least I'll still have the rest of the sticks at home, right? Do they actually melt? I digress. Maybe the best test of all was when I got tired of working at my studio desk. I packed up my kit, moved rooms, and resumed working in my favorite easy chair. I think this alone made the kit worthwhile. It won't replace my smaller setups for short trips with minimal luggage, but for road trips and long trips, I'm feeling pretty confident. I'd love to know your approach to travel art kits. Let me know in the comments. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe for more content like this.